Hello everyone, welcome to Let's Play Board Game Edition. This week I'm going to be covering an objective completing cooperative game called Hope City. Okay, so the goal of Hope City is to complete one of the two objectives through the game. The first objective is to complete 3 city sites by the end of year 7. So if by the end of when you get to the end of year 7 and you have 3 city sites, you win the game. But even if you have 3 city sites earlier, say you have 3 city sites in year 5, you have to keep going till the end of year 7 because you can lose them. And so the goal is to have 3 city sites out at the end of year 7. Or alternatively, if you can do it, it's very difficult to do. If at any point in the game you place all 5 city sites, and both the mayor and the doctor are good, rather not bad, so meaning they're in the game, you win the game immediately. That's the only way you can win immediately, is by placing all 5 city sites and having these 2 characters be good. I'll get into what being good and bad means later, but with that being said, if you have all 5 placed and, say, the mayor is bad, is the mobster, or the doctor is the drug dealer, you don't win until they are flipped over and the city sites are still on the board. So those are the 2 ways to win. Like many co-op games, there are also a lot of ways to lose the game. The first being, obviously, not completing having 3 city sites at the end of year 7, so that would be the first way to lose. The second way to lose would be if all characters are in the game are bad, all active characters are bad, or if all 5 urban blights, the opposite of city sites, are in play. If any of those conditions happen, the players immediately lose, and the game is over. So with that being said, let's start setting up the game. Okay, so the first thing to do with the setup is each player needs to choose their character. So there are 6 characters to choose from, so obviously in a 6-player game, you're going to use all of them. But in a 3, 4, or 5, you would have to pick which ones you want. So once each player has chosen their character and put it in front of them, then every character card is going to get 2 talent tokens, denoted by these little stars. Now, I say all characters, both the ones that people have chosen and the ones that have not been chosen. You want to keep those characters that weren't chosen by the side of the board because they are used throughout the game. The characters that were chosen are called active characters, while the ones that were not chosen are called inactive characters. I'll get into more details of why that's important later. But yeah, so make sure everyone gets 2 talent tokens. All characters start out with 2 talents. That these are 2 single-use abilities that they'll get to use throughout the game. So pick your card. Each card has a little meeple that goes with it. So you want to collect that, and you're going to put that on the board, and I'll show you where in a second. So that's choosing your characters. Okay, so now that everyone has their character and all the characters are prepared, I'm going to show you how to set up the board. The first thing you want to do is you're going to look at the 5 different decks of colors here at the top, and you're going to separate out the major objectives. You'll see on the card, these are all the ones that cost 5. There are 2 of each color. So you'll see here, they have the same backs, so they have to be separated out. 2 of each color. And they get shuffled into their own deck and put up face up near the board. The other 5 decks should have 8 cards each, and they'll have, so you shuffle them and put them at the top of the board. I like to match them up with the order of the locations on the board, but it doesn't really matter. You're going to take the chaos cards, you're going to shuffle them, you're going to take 8 of them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Put the 8 in the chaos card area of the board. You're going to take 1 of those cards, put it on the T of the future track, and then you're going to take whatever's left and you put it in the box. That's not going to be used for the rest of the game. Then you're going to take the hope cards, And they're going to get shuffled, and you're going to take 5 of them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they're going to be put in the hope card area of the board. And then, like the chaos cards, they're going to go back in the box. The rest of those are not going to be used throughout the game. You're going to take the 2 yellow tokens and mark off that you're going to start in year 1, and that business expansion starts at 0. I'll get into what those mean a little later. You're going to take 2 punks, the little punks, indicated with by these little pink meeples, and you're going to put 1 in politics, and you're going to put 1 in economics. And then you're going to take the Hope City Phoenix Monument card, and you're going to just put that by the board with the monument, and then you're going to take everything else and put that by the side of the... Oh, and then you're going to set up the trade center. You're going to put 1 of each resource in the wheel, as well as 1 hope token. The hope token is denoted by this phoenix. That's a wild, so 1 of each and a wild in there. And that's how you set up the board. Now, things change slightly depending on the number of players. This is correct for a 3 to 4 player game. In a 5-player game, you're actually going to place a 3rd additional punk on society. And in a 6-player game, instead of having just 1 of each resource in the trade center, you're going to put 2 of each resource in the trade center. But that's only in a 6-player game. Then lastly, you're going to take your characters. So I say I have 4 characters here, and you're going to put them in their starting areas, matching their color. So the entrepreneur goes in green, the engineer goes in blue, mayor goes in yellow, and then you have the doctor who's white. You'll notice there's no white areas on the board, so the doctor just gets to pick. So in this case, the doctor wants to start out in environment, so he's going to start there. And that's how you set up the board. You take everything else and just put it over to the side of the board, all the extra research, all the extra resources and all that. Just keep nearby because you'll access those throughout the game. So that's setting up the board. Now I'm going to talk about the last step, setting up the bag and giving out starting resources. Okay, so the last step is setting up the bag, basically putting the resources in the bag that the players are going to be drawing from to get their resources for the turn. So to start, you're going to put 3 of each resource. Note, I say resource, not hope tokens. It's just 3 of the environment, society, economics, politics, and technology resources, as well as 2 corruption tokens, denoted here with the anarchy A symbol. So you're going to take all of those tokens and put them in the bag. So it comes with a nice little felt bag. Pretty cool. So you put them all in the bag so you won't see what you're drawing when you draw your resources. And once all the resources are in the bag, each player draws 1 resource as their starting resource. Now, because there are corruption in there, you might start out with no resources and rather have 1 corruption. So that's how that works. The only difference is that in a 3-player game, each player draws 2 resources rather than 1. That helps because you start out with less players. You start out with less resources. This kind of helps balance that fact. So basically, in a 3-player game, in a 4-player game, it would, like 1 person would draw 1. Oh, they got corruption. The mayor doesn't have any restarting resource. That stinks. Then next person got an environment, the next person got an economics, and another person got an economics. So those would be the people's starting resources. The rest get left in the bag to be drawn. And that's the setup. I think then we'll move on to how to play the game. Okay, so now that we have the whole game set up, we have our I set it up for a 4-player game. We have our 4 players. We have their characters on the board. The doctor chose to start out in society. We have our 2 cards down here for our inactive players, which I'll get into a little bit. So we're all set up and ready to go. Now, at the beginning of the game and at the beginning of every year afterwards, 2 things are going to happen. The first thing that's going to happen is that you're going to make sure that there are at least 2 punks on the board. So we have 1 punk here in economics and we have 1 punk here in politics. They can be small punks or big punks. We haven't seen big punks yet, but I'll talk about how you get them in a little bit. So we have 2 punks on the board. So we have that done. Then we're going to flip over the round's chaos card. The chaos card is basically, it's a condition that the players have to complete. For example, this one here. Or if they don't complete it, chaos happens, bad stuff happens. So for this one, the citizens must achieve a society objective. So meaning they have to complete a purple objective this round. And then there has to be no cards in the crime pile, which basically means, the wording has changed slightly. Basically there's going to have to be no cards in the purple fail pile, which will be on the left side of the board in the final version of the game. So basically, complete a purple objective and not have any failed purple objectives is the goal for the round. If they do that, nothing happens, the chaos card goes away, they passed it. But if they don't pass this by either not passing a society objective or having a purple card in the fail pile, they have to downgrade the business expansion, and all citizens lose 1 resource. So bad stuff happens. It's something that you want to try to keep in mind and try to do every turn. Every round you'll have a different chaos card come and affect it, kind of adding some variability to the turns. So those are the first 2 things you do at the beginning of a round. Then it starts with the first player's turn. The first player in every round and every part of the game is always the mayor. So the mayor is going to go first. Also, one thing to remember to do at the beginning of every round, which isn't on the first round obviously, is to move the year marker ahead 1 to the next year. Okay, so each turn is exactly the same. It's made up of 9 steps. I know that sounds like a lot, but really most of the stuff are pretty much just reactionary and are really not complex. And so turns go really quickly. The first thing that a player does, the very first thing, no matter that they do, is draw 1 resource from the citizen. Well, 1 token from the citizen wage bag. When you draw from the bag, you have 2 options. Either you can draw a resource. So like here, the mayor is going first, as I said. So she drew a society resource, so she would get to keep that. The other option is, if you reach into the bag, you could pull out a corruption token, the anarchy symbol. Yep, there. That means you don't get a resource this turn. You don't draw again. Instead, you just put that on your corruption meter on your board, and you continue your turn from that point on, without getting an additional resource. The second thing you do on a turn is you can trade with the trade center. So here you see the mayor has 2 resources, has a politics and a society, and she can trade one of those with anything in the trade center. So for example, she wants the hope token to make sure that she can do something this turn, and she really thinks she needs to do one. So she's going to take the hope token. So she's going to be able to do any politics quest this turn because of that, and you'll see why in a second. So she traded with the trade center. She put the other society token in there. So that's the second step. The third step is move. She can move to a different city space if she wants. They're all connected. There is no like distance rule in this. You just pick one of the 5 locations and you move there. In this case, she's already on politics. She wants to do a politics objective, so she's just going to stay there. The fourth thing that happens is you face a punk attack if there are any punks in the area. So as you can see here, there's a little punk in politics, so she's going to have to face a punk attack. On the other hand, had she moved over here to, say, environment, where there are no punks, she would skip this step. Or whoever was playing the mayor would skip this step. So she faces a punk attack. The way you do that is you take 1 black die for every punk in the area, and you roll it. And on a 5 or 6, or on a 1 or 2, the punk hits you, and you gain a corruption. On a 3 or 4, nothing happens. It's a draw. And on a 5 or 6, the person who rolled may pay 1 resource to remove the punk and put it on their card. So in this case, she had rolled a 5, but she only has 2 resources, and she doesn't want to waste them right now because she's really trying to do an objective, so, which all costs 1 or 2 resources. So she's not going to risk it, and so she's just going to let the 5 go. So that was step 4. So next, you choose an objective card. You can either choose an objective card from the pile of the color of area you're from, or if there are cards in the future track, which I'll talk about getting there, you can choose a card of that color in the future track to try. So in this case, she's going to choose one from the top of the deck, and she's got a vote on the genetic engineering bill. Here at the top of the card is the cost. Here is what happens, how to pass or fail the objective, and then you have your success, what happens if you succeed, and your fail, what happens if you fail. So she has politics and a hope token, so she could pay her politics and research, or her technology, so she can pay the cost. But then she would have to. Then you would have a vote where everyone says yes or no, and majority rules, with the mayor breaking any ties for a vote. And then if everyone says yes, or if it passes, you get succeed, and it says here, close the future track by 1 and gain a punk. Or if everyone chooses to fail this one, if the vote majority chooses to fail this one, you would open the future track by 1, and the engineer loses 1 talent. So, let's say they don't want to do this one right now because it's a vote and the success isn't even all that great. Another option is if she can't afford it. Let's say instead of grabbing the hope token, she had grabbed, say, the economics. She wouldn't be able to pay for it. So either if you choose not to do it, or if you can't pay for it, you can always put them in the future track if there are open spots. So as we said, now she has a politics and a economics token, so she's going to choose to put it in the future track because there's an open spot. Now, what happens if there are no open spots in the future track and you have it? So let's say she drew another one, and once again, she doesn't have a politics and a society. She traded her society away thinking she wasn't going to get one. So she can't pay for it, but the future track is full. Well, that means you're going to fail one of these, one of the quests, or one of the objectives. And how you decide which one goes to the fail pile is you roll a die. You'll notice here above the future track there are different numbers. So you roll the dice. On a 1, you would be failing this one, and you face the failure consequences of that. On a 2, you'd fail this one. And then if you notice there's nothing else in 3 or above, so 3 or above would mean you fail this one. So we roll, she rolled a 3, there's nothing at the 3, so this one gets put into the fail pile. That would be over here on this side of the board. And then we have to close the future track by 1, but they get a resistance roll on all punks. So that's kind of nice. So except it's in the fail pile now. Yeah, so that's how, what happens if you can't pay for an objective. Now, on the other hand, let's say she did have a society, and she pays for it and fail, and they choose the vote they choose to fail. It goes over here, and you face. I think I already covered that. You face the negative consequences if you pass it. You put it here over on the right-hand side, and she succeeds. Now, whenever you succeed a quest of your color, the reason why she went over here in the first place and stayed at politics and faced that punk attack is because every time you complete objective of your color, so the mayor's orange, the politics is orange, let's say they voted yes, they completed it, so you get a hope card every time you complete one of your color. So she completed an orange one, she gets a hope card. You want to keep these are all good cards. They all do really amazing, good things. You want to keep them a secret. You do that to help negate the alpha player. It's supposed to keep the game a little more interesting, so one person can't control the entire game. It's gives the player that gets it something to do. So she gets a hope card because she completed one of her thing. Now you'll notice, as I said before, the doctor doesn't have a color. So how does the doctor get hope cards? Well, the doctor, rather than doing one of her color, gets a hope card every time she completes an objective after facing a punk attack that turn. So let's say the doctor had moved here to economics, or had moved to politics, faced a punk attack, and she completed the vote. She would have gotten a hope card because she had faced a punk attack that round. So I think in there I actually combined a couple different steps. That was step 5 was pay. You decide whether or not you can pay for it. Step 6 is achieve. You do whatever it says on the card. In these cases, the politics were votes. Sometimes they're rolling dice. Sometimes they're doing other things. You do whatever is on the card. So that's 7. 8 is resolve. If you pass it, you complete the success stuff, or you do the failure stuff. And then step 9 is you place it in the appropriate success or fail pile. So if they've succeeded, you'd put it over to the right, and if they failed, they'd put it over to the left. And that's a turn. So in this case, they succeeded, put over here in the success pile, and then it would move over to the entrepreneur clockwise, and the entrepreneur would take their turn, starting with drawing a citizen wage from the bag. One thing I also wanted to mention about the future track is that what happens if it closes when it is full. So there are certain cards, mostly these politics cards, that open or close the future track. So let's say you have a full future track and it gets closed. You basically shift the entire thing over by 1, and then any cards that fall off, you complete their fail effects. You fail those tests, you put them in the fail pile, and so this one here, ban, you open the future track. So you would then open the future track back up, and the engineer would lose 1 talent. This would sit in the fail pile. So that's what happens if the future track closes while it is full. There are also 2 other options for things players can do on their turn that are not included in those 9 things. The first is they can use one of their talents. So basically you can spend one of these tokens, they're one-time use star tokens, and you can use your talent. So here, the mayor's ability, you would spend it, and it allows you to attempt 1 fail card, which means if they had failed a yellow one, she could spend this to rather attempt 1 from the deck or 1 from the future track. She could attempt a fail one instead. It doesn't give her an additional attempt. It just allows her to attempt an objective that would not normally be allowed. The other option is you can also do a corruption action, which is over here. Corruption actions, they're very powerful, but they're temptation actions, not corruption actions, but they can give you corruption. So basically, every time you use your temptation action, you roll this die that has 6 different sides. 1 side with the person, that means you get no corruption. 4 sides that show 1 corruption, and 1 side gains 2 corruption. So basically, every time you use that action, you roll the die. So she would get another corruption, which puts her at her maximum. So she would break bad. I'll describe that in a second. So it would probably not be a good idea for the mayor to do it right, to have used a temptation action, but she did. So she'd gain a corruption from the box. It doesn't come from the bag. This is how you introduce more corruption into the game. So she would get that. But she would still get her temptation action. So she would still open the future track up by 1. So those are the 2 additional actions that players can do on their turn that aren't part of the 9 steps. One last thing I wanted to mention about using the talent abilities. In addition to being able to spend your talents for your talent abilities, you can also choose to spend them by putting them here on this the Phoenix Monument card. And when the 5th talent token is placed on there, the person who placed the 5th one takes the monument token and puts it on their character, and then at any point in the game they can choose to place it by placing it on the environment, and then it has different effects depending on what year it is. They're cumulative effects. So if you use it in years after year 3, or in year 3, you get certain powers. If you use it in 4, you get the one that happened in year 3 as well as the one that happens in year 4, all the way down the list, all the way down to the one. If you use it in year 7, you get all of the abilities. So that's pretty nice. Also, instead of using your own talent, you can choose to recruit the talent of one of the inactive characters. So let's say it's the mayor's turn, and we haven't played the Phoenix Monument token yet. She doesn't want to use one of her talents, but she thinks that she wants to put one of the talents from the Ranger on the Phoenix Monument, so she can recruit him for his action and put his token there rather than using her own. Or she could use his token and use his talent instead of her own. So while these characters are not fully in the game, you can use their talent actions. You cannot, however, use their corruption actions. They also cannot gain corruption. You cannot put corruption tokens on those cards. You can just use them for their recruiting their talents. Okay, so then finally, after everyone's taken their turn, at the end of every round, you add 1 corruption token to the bag for each punk on the board. So you'll see here, we still have 1 punk on economics, 1 punk on politics. So I'm going to take 2 corruption from the box and put them into the wage bag, so that they can be drawn. So as the game goes on, the reason why you would want to get rid of punks is because they add corruption at the end of every turn, making it more likely that you'll draw corruption and less likely that you'll draw resources. That's why you would want to get. That's an advantage to getting rid of. A reason for wanting to get rid of those. Okay, so now that we've discussed what happens on a turn, let's discuss how you get those precious city sites that you need to win. City sites can be obtained in 3 ways. The first and probably the easiest way is by completing an objective that gives one to you. For example, all the major objectives, i.e. the ones that cost 5 resources, their success is a city site. So that's probably the easiest, fastest way to get one, but it takes a lot of resources to do, and they're usually fairly difficult or random challenges that you have to pass to get the city sites that way. There's also 1 card in each deck, I believe it's 1 card in each deck, that can give you an automatic city site, but once again, those are extremely difficult and or random. So that's the first way, is to get one, do an objective that gives you a city site. The second and probably most common way to get a city site is to collect a complete set of past objectives. So say you've succeeded in one of each objective, you take them, you collect them as a set, you put them together, you take them out of the game for the time being, and then you place a city site showing that you've completed 1 set of cards. Those cards are, for the most part, out of the game. They do get shuffled back in if at any point you run out of cards in one of the decks. You would shuffle all those cards back together, but that happens so rarely that I don't know if I've ever actually shuffled any of the decks, because we've never gotten through an entire stack. But I guess in theory it is possible. And the third and final way is to collect punks and big punks. When you place a city site, you remove 1. Well, I'll get into that in a second. Basically, you need little punks. You need 6 little punks and 2 big punks. Big punks are special. They come out separately. So basically, if you can, through a combined effort, remove 6 little punks and 2 big punks, you can trade those in for a city site. Now, let's talk about how big punks come into play. Because normally, at the beginning of the turn, when I said you need 2 punks on the board at the beginning of every turn, you always put out little punks. Big punks only come out when you place city sites. So let's say we completed a set as I showed you. I placed this city site. We then get to remove one punk and place a big punk. And the big punks work a little differently when fighting. So when you do rolls for them, you know how I said on a 1 or 2 they hit and give corruption to the player. On a 3 or 4 they do nothing, and a 5 or 6 you could remove them. Well, big punks on a 3, 4, or 5 nothing happens, and only on a 6 can you remove them. So they're harder to remove. Then that is so that's big punk. That's how you get big punks on the board. So obviously you can't get those. You can't complete that third way without having 2 city sites placed, because you wouldn't have 2 big punks that way. A good thing to note is any city site placed after the first 2 will not place big punks, because there are only 2 big punks. They just end up removing punks. So let's say we have 2 city sites already, and we place our third. We will remove this little punk, but since there are no more big punks to replace it, it just comes off. So it's the more city sites you place, the better they become, because those first 2 will create big punks. Now, how do you get urban blights? The opposite of the city sites. Urban blights happen when you fail a set of objectives. So, like passing them, if you have 1 in the fail pile of each color, you take them, you put them to the side, off to the side, and you place an urban blight token down. When you place an urban blight token, you end up, you actually can give 1 player an extra talent token from the box. So essentially, you place an urban blight and someone gets a talent back, kind of as compensation for the city going bad. I'm not quite sure. I mean, it's mainly to do. I mean, it doesn't make so much thematically, but it works mechanically. It's kind of like when you try to. Mainly, it happens when you're doing a hard quest and you fail it. You spent so many resources. It's kind of like the consolation prize is you get a talent token, even though you placed an urban blight. Now, one situation that rarely comes up is what happens if you need to place a city site or an urban blight while all 5 areas are taken. So let's say we have our 4 here, and we need to place another city site. Well, we can't. There is no open space, so we take the urban blight and we flip it over to a city site. Same thing is true for when you need to place an urban blight. If there's out on the board and you need to place an urban blight, you would flip a city site over and make it an urban blight. This doesn't happen very often, but it could happen in theory. And the other way to get urban blights is by failing these objectives. That any time you have an objective that the success is a city site, the failure is an urban blight. So that's the other way to get urban blights out on the board, which are not good things. They're a bad sign. They're kind of demoralizing to see on the board. So that's that. Now I'm going to talk about how characters go bad. Okay, so now I wanted to talk about how a character breaks bad. So a character becomes bad when their corruption track is filled. So you'll notice here the mayor only needs 2 corruption to become bad, while the doctor and really every other character needs 3. So you gain corruption in a couple of ways, as I've mentioned. You can gain corruption by drawing them from the bag as wages. You can also gain corruption by rolling the corruption die when you use a temptation action. And those are the 2 real big ways. You can also get them for failing objectives and a couple other ways. So what happens is, let's say the mayor had just had 1 corruption and drew another corruption from the wage bag as her wage for the city wage for the turn. So now she turns bad. She breaks bad. You take all the corruption on her card, the corruption that's on her card, and you put it into the bag. So that means there's more corruption in the bag. It's more likely you'll draw corruption rather than good resources, so that's not good. And then you flip the character card over, showing that they're bad. So now the mayor has become a mobster. She's corrupt. It means she cannot use her talents while she's bad, and she cannot gain any more corruption. Any corruption that she gets while she's the mobster, she has to give to another player of her choice. In addition to that, all the characters have an individual flaw. So, for example, here, the mobster may not put cards in the future track. She either has to pay for them and complete them, or she automatically fails them, and you face the punishment of failure, and they go into the fail pile rather than being able to put them into an open spot on the future track. Though, if you turn bad, it's not the end of the world. You can, they can be redeemed. As it says here, anytime you get to flip this card anytime a politics card moves into the success pile. That happens in two ways. Either someone completes a politics objective and succeeds on it, or there are cards that can move cards from the fail pile into the success pile. Those also count in flipping it. So let's say someone completed an objective, moved a failed orange politics card into the success pile, and she would flip back over. She would not gain any more talents. She'd have whatever talents she had left when she flipped, if any, and she starts out with no corruption. The doctor is very similar, but as you'll notice, as I've said a couple times already, the doctor doesn't have a color, so obviously she can't use objectives to flip back. So you'll notice when she goes bad after getting 3 corruption, she requires a city site to flip her back good, to becoming the doctor. So she is much harder to flip back. So you have to be more careful with her, and because maybe sometimes it's a strategy to make her flip right before you get a city site, just to clear her corruption. Now it puts corruption in the bag, but at the same time, she won't flip later, because she is probably one of the worst flaws as well. So that's a strategy to playing the game. So that's Breaking Bad. As I said, if all the players, all the active characters in the game are bad at the same time, the players immediately lose the game. So you want to be very careful. There's one thing that I wanted to clarify about monitoring your corruption and making sure that does not happen. The difference between a punk attack versus a resistance roll. They are done very similarly, but they happen at 2 different times, and they are just slightly different. So, as I mentioned, if you move to an area or stay in an area that has a punk, you do your die roll, and on a 1 or 2 you take a hit by gaining a corruption. On 3 or 4 nothing happens, and on 5 or 6 you can pay to get rid of a punk, or on a 6 you can get rid of a big punk. That's a punk attack. Now, a resistance roll is triggered by something. They don't normally just happen. They happen by things like the engineer's talent can cause a resistance roll. There are objectives that either success or failure causes a resistance roll. And like a punk attack, you roll 1 die for every punk that you're rolling against. But in this situation, you don't have to be in the same location. You can do a resistance roll even if, say, it's the doctor's turn and they're over here and they're told to do a resistance roll. They could choose this punk here or in economics, or this punk in politics, or if the engineer moves to technology, they could use their talent to do a resistance roll on one of these 2 punks without having to move. The other advantage of a resistance roll versus a punk attack is on a 1 to 4 nothing happens, and on a 5 or 6 you remove the punk without having to pay. There is no cost, you just remove the punk. Of course, if it's a big punk, 1 to 5 nothing happens, and on a 6 you would remove a big punk. So that's the difference between punk attacks versus punk resistance rolls. The punk attacks you can get hit back, and you have to pay to remove. Resistance rolls are just you attacking them, and doesn't cost anything to do if you succeed. So I just wanted to make that clear, because that's not always immediately clear. So the last thing I wanted to discuss is the business expansion track. It's really one of the biggest keys to winning the game. It's one of the best mitigation for the randomness of what is these objective cards. So business expansion starts out at 0, which means that all the players are on their own. They have to do everything by themselves, they have to pay everything by themselves. Unless the objective says otherwise, they do it all themselves. Some of the cards, mostly green ones, will increase the business expansion track. So when a business expansion gets to a point to 1, it means that one player in the same area as the person whose turn it is can help pay. So let's say we have the mayor comes to economics here, and so she can use her resources as well as any that the entrepreneur, because he is here as well, to pay for the objectives, to use to complete the objectives, so they can work together. The only stipulation is that all the rewards go to the person whose turn it is. The entrepreneur could not gain any resources from this. All the rewards go to her, but he can help pay for the things, which helps mitigate, I don't have the right 2 resources to pay for the objective. So that's pretty important. And then 2 is pretty similar, but 2 people can help out instead of just 1. So if you had 3 people here on economics, you could have the mayor, the entrepreneur, and the engineer help pay for them. This is a good way to get these major objectives done, because it's really hard to get 5 resources on one character card. So the best way to do this is to get this business expansion up so that you can more easily pay for these cards. So that's the business expansion track, and that's pretty much the game. So I'll meet you back at the wall of weaponry. Well, that's it for the rules. I'm not going to go over the individual characters here, because I know that they're still going through a process of changing, so I don't want to give you wrong information. So that's all. I hope you enjoyed. Please remember to share, like, and subscribe, and I hope to see you in my review and playthrough videos.